Good afternoon to everybody here in Mountain View. Thanks for coming out. And to our Googlers tuning in offices around the world, hello, good day to you as well. We have a really exciting hour ahead of us. We're here with Ashley Vance, as you guys know. So Ashley is a feature journalist for Bloomberg Businessweek. He's written a bunch, I think over a dozen now, feature and cover stories for Bloomberg. And we're here today to talk about his new book. I think it was out in May.
Yeah.
Okay, it's Elon Musk. And so you can call yourself an Elon Musk biographer now.
Yeah.
Very exciting stuff. And is the book, I think I read it's a New York Times bestseller now?
It's been on the bestseller list just about since it came out, 12 weeks. Yeah.
Very cool, congratulations. And it's rightfully so, it's a fascinating read. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly encourage you to do so. So we've got about 30 or 40 minutes of facilitated Q&A we're gonna do. And then we have a mic in the back to pass around for audience question and answer as well. So to begin, Ashley, before Bloomberg, you were with the New York Times, The Economist, a few other places. How did you get into tech journalism, and specifically, how did you decide to write a book about Elon?
Well, I guess it's sort of two different things. I mean, I kind of stumbled into tech journalism. I was a philosophy major at college, so I had to find a way to feed myself. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I never really thought of being a reporter. And I sort of graduated during the dot-com boom, and there were tons of jobs. I wanted to live in San Francisco, and there were tons of reporter jobs open for anyone who wanted to be paid very little and work hard. And so I did that, and I ended up liking it. I got thrown into covering like semiconductors and networking equipment. I was working for a trade publication, basically, and knew nothing about any of this stuff. So I downloaded Unix, started learning about RISC chips, and then off I went. The Elon thing, I mean, I guess it does sort of come out from that a little bit. You know, I was never the person that covered consumer tech stuff and was never like really into I was into the web, but it's just never the area that I really wrote about a lot. I always wrote about companies that actually made things, so, and that had factories, and I don't know why. That's just kind of what I gravitated towards. And
Sure.
So, you know, I was not like that into Elon until about 2012, and I did a cover story on him. And when I saw Tesla's factories and SpaceX factories, especially SpaceX, I decided that's what I had to do.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So was Elon on board from the beginning? How did that go?
Yeah, no, I mean, so in 2012, I did a Businessweek cover story on Elon, and you know, we got along pretty well. I got to spend a bunch of time with him, going through the SpaceX factory, and we went to movie premieres and all this stuff, and you know, the companies were very interesting, and Elon was much more interesting than I'd given him credit for before the story. You know, I'd sort of pegged him as just like a one-note techno-utopian kind of guy, and you know, he turned out to be this great interview. He didn't have PR handlers around him, so you had access to him, and he would answer just about anything you asked him. And so I decided then, this is a guy I really want to write about, and I'd been looking for a book to do. And so after I did the story, a couple months went by, and then I started to feel Elon out about doing a book. And I think I either sent him an email or called him on the phone, and I said, this is what I want to do. And he said, look, a bunch of people have asked me in the past, and I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna help you do the book. And then I went to New York and I sold the book anyway. And I thought I would sort of force his hand a little bit. And then I arranged another meeting with him. And I'll never forget, it was on a Saturday at Tesla. And I came in, I was like, look, I've sold the book. And he said, I'm still not gonna cooperate with you. And so I spent like 18 months interviewing hundreds of people. I found like all these SpaceX and Tesla employees, most of whom had left, all the Zip2, PayPal people that he'd worked with, his ex-girlfriends, his like childhood friends, and all that stuff. And then, you know, a lot of those people would call back to Elon and say, should I speak to him or not? And he was a pretty good sport about it. There's nobody that he told not to. And so I think that happened enough times that after about 18 months of doing it, I was at home. It's like 6:30 at night on a weekday, and up on my caller ID, it was just Elon Musk. And I picked up the phone, and he said, look, I can basically, this is going to go one of two ways. I can shut down all these people that call me and ask whether, you know, I should let them talk to you, or I could cooperate with the book. And I was like, obviously, you should choose option number B, or option B. And then we set up a meeting to talk about it. He wanted to have some control over it initially. He wanted to be able to read the book before it came out, and then he wanted to put footnotes in the book. And if you know anything about Elon, that would mean the footnotes would be longer than the book, and that the book would probably never be published. And so I kind of pushed back on him on that. I had this huge speech prepared, and I got like 5 minutes into it, and he just said, okay. And to his credit, after that, he gave me access to everybody I wanted, and then he agreed to have a meeting with me, once a month, he said, for as long as it took. It ended up being about 8 months, and we would have like 3, 4, 5-hour dinners.
Wow. So the book, I have to say, especially the beginning, it reads kind of like a suspense thriller, even though it's nonfiction, because I don't want to give too much away, but it opens with you kind of showing up a little early for this meeting, sitting down with a drink, waiting for Elon to show up, knowing full well that this is kind of a make or break moment.
Yeah.
And it goes well, like you said. I can't believe you didn't agree to his 2 demands, by the way. They seemed reasonable, but...
There was part of me, so he's got this very unique writing style. Part of me, I thought it would be like a novelty to sort of see, to see kind of like his thinking on some of this stuff. And there was like a moment in time where if he had really, really pushed on that, maybe. But, honestly, I could see stuff in the book where it's like, oh, he had a turkey sandwich on this day, and then it would be 5 pages about why he could not have had a turkey sandwich, and it had to be a ham sandwich because, and it was just going to be a mess.
Fair enough. So how does this conversation end? You get what you want. How does it end?
Well, it was weird. The dinner went on. I feel like that first one was like 2 or 3 hours, and it was all over the place. We talked about Larry Page a bit and AI, and then we had these other things where it was very Elon. He's kind of like, I'm looking for a PR person, and they'd say, who's the best PR person in the world? And the conversation went all these different ways, and then I thought he agreed to participate in the book, and then right at the end, he's kind of getting up, and he stood up from the table first, and then he came back, and he put both his hands on the table, and he looked me in the eye, and then he said, do you think I'm insane? And I'd already been through this whole huge test, and my brain is going, I'm like, is this the last sort of riddle? Like, what does that mean? How am I supposed to answer this question? I don't is this the final test to see if he'll cooperate? And I remember all this stuff was going through my brain so fast while he's still looking at you in the eyes, and I think I just sort of mumbled out something about, it was like, no, I don't think you're crazy. I think some of the stuff you do could be perceived that way, but no, I'm sort of like at least into the companies where I wouldn't be doing this. But ultimately I came to just sort of think, I don't even think anything I said would have mattered. I think he was kind of it was like this one last gut check, of whether I could be kind of at least quasi-trusted.
Trusted, okay. Yeah. So if you'd said, yes, I think you're crazy, you think he still would have?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was like looking in my eye to sort of see see what happened, Or maybe I also thought he'd already made up his mind and he was just kind of asking himself a little bit.
I see, I understand. So what was the process like? You mentioned about 8 months, once a month you get together. What is it like to spend a few hours a month interviewing Elon Musk?
It was really fun. At the beginning it was nerve-wracking because I never knew how many of these interviews I would actually get, even though he had agreed to it. I always sort of thought, he might do one and then he'd be like, okay, that's enough. and then I thought, he might get sick of it after a while and just cut me off.
Sure.
So each one, it was sort of felt like an accomplishment. But then it was frustrating because the first 4, I was getting lots of useful stuff, but nothing that was, I could tell he was still holding back a bit, and he was repeating a lot of stories that if you kind of watch Elon's speeches and other talks that you would have heard before.
Sure.
And so that was frustrating. And then I'm still not sure exactly what happened, but around the 4th meeting, we used to always do the same thing. We would get there. He eats really late, so it'd be like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and we would go a few times till just everybody had left. And it was kind of one of those things. There was like hardly anybody there. And it was like a switch kind of flipped. I think he'd sort of really committed to doing it, and he became much more relaxed and
Okay.
easygoing. But on the whole, it's like what I looked forward to every month. It was really fun. I mean, if you consider the idea that he might actually be like the first guy on Mars, it was weird to be having dinner with this guy over and over again and getting to ask him like whatever you wanted.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about his childhood upbringing in a moment, but something that stuck out for me when I was reading the beginning, you mentioned some things from his youth. I think he's in Canada at this point. He's not even in college yet. I'm not sure if he is. And he's having a birthday party, and it's the first time where romance appears in the book. And he's sitting on this couch with a young woman.
Yeah.
And one of the first things he says to her is, "If I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't.
Right.
If I could just, get rid of eating and just work all the time, I would just do that." And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I mean, this is the 90s. This is way before Soylent or anything. So what is it like to eat with Elon Musk at 8:30?
Eating with Elon is an experience. It's I've
Really?
never I mean like the actual act of eating. Yeah.
How so?
I've never seen anyone who eats as fast as he does. It's like in that first meeting I didn't know how long I would have him there, and so I have my tape recorder on, and then I sort of have my computer on the side as well. I always take notes, and even though I'm recording, it helps me remember stuff and sort of highlight things. And we're going along. We ordered appetizers. I mean, first of all, Elon sort of has to. It takes him a while to kind of figure out what he wants to eat, and like I think he's kind of used to having a lot of this stuff taken care for him. Like his assistant, when I would be at the office, I mean, she would just bring him food, and he'd like scarf it down, and sort of didn't even seem like he was paying attention to what he was eating at all. And when we'd go to these restaurants, it was like, it's kind of like, what do you want to eat? I don't know, and we would never get anywhere. So I would make all these decisions, and we ordered like a ton of appetizers instead of just getting like one or two. Then he would just be like, let's just order like 6 things, and then, I'm asking questions and he's talking. So he's doing most of the talking, and they're just like all disappearing one after the other. And I'm like, this is going way too fast. I mean, I have to have this dinner last like as long as possible. And they're all just, I would sort of look down at my computer for a second, and like entire things would just vanish from the plate. And then the main courses came, and the same thing was happening again. And then I knew I was like really on the clock. And so he had gotten some sort of seafood, like I think it was like octopus or squid in black ink, and then it was lobster fried with black squid ink, and then I got a steak, and he'd already finished his dinner, and I was only like 2 questions in, and so I cut off like half my steak and put it on his plate, and I thought this will hold him. It was like 2 bites, and that was gone.
Oh wow!
And then this kind of repeated itself over and
Wow.
over. I mean, I think for him, food really is it's just fuel.
I see that. Okay. I promise we're going to leave this dinner after this question. But one more thing came up. You mentioned. I think we were talking before that at a few of these dinners, rambling all sorts of subjects. But one thing that comes up occasionally is Elon's greatest mortal fear in the world, and I wonder if you'd share that with us.
Well, I mean, it's these days it's AI and you guys, I think. I mean, it's funny because he's friends with Larry. But okay, so in this first dinner, there's also like no small talk with Elon. So I'm coming into this thing. It's like my whole life feels like it's on the line. I've like made this huge gamble on this book, and I have to sort of convince him to participate. And so I had like a gin and tonic to try to settle my nerves before he got there. And then he's like sitting down, and you just say like, "Hey, how's it going?" And before his butt even hit the seat, he's like, how's it going? My greatest, he's like, well, I'm just consumed by this fear that Google is going to destroy mankind. That's like what he says is like, he's getting into the chair, and he's friends with Larry. Elon doesn't have, he sort of splits his time between LA and Silicon Valley, but he doesn't have a house in Silicon Valley. And so he either stays at a hotel or he kind of couch surfs or like villa surfs at like this group of 4 people, and Larry's one of those 4 people. So he's like a really close friend, and so that it sort of threw me. I'm like sort of fundamentally think Larry's evil. He's like, no, it's kind of the opposite. He's kind of naively nice, and I think he sort of felt like Larry had a where Elon has like a cynical take on where AI is heading. He feels like Larry is too optimistic about where it's heading. And it was funny because this was 2012, and it felt like it was like the early days of Elon starting to really become top of mind for him. And then ever since then, now he's writing papers about it. He's like calling out Google and stuff. So I don't know like what it's like when they're at the house together.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I understand. So for somebody who's involved with so many potentially world and humanity-changing endeavors, does Elon have a worldview, or does he have a sole focus or goal or mission? And maybe you could talk about where that might come from, if he has one.
Yeah, I guess it's a couple levels. His driving purpose these days is to have a colony on Mars and not like 5 people, like 1 million people. And I think it comes from this very logical. He's hyper rational. He thinks, and it probably makes more sense. I think maybe to a lot of people in Silicon Valley. I think to people outside of the valley, it's a weird life's goal. But I think he thinks that something horrible could happen to the human race, and we kind of need a backup plan. And nobody else is like really actively working on this. I mean, some people are, but not sort of like at the scale he is. And that he's going to be the guy that makes this backup plan. I've had like a couple software developers who read the book and they're like, yes, I totally identify with the need for this. And so, that is like absolutely what he wakes up in the morning wanting to do. And I think stuff like Tesla and Solar City, it's kind of on the way to this journey and setting up this thing. Let's try to make Earth sort of function a little bit better on the way.
I see that. In the book you mentioned, I think it's a quote from Elon when he says that he read too many comic books as a kid.
Yeah.
Do you feel like he has that, like the Earth needs to be saved mentality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple bits and pieces to it. Near the end of the book, I sort of put forward a theory that I think there's a clinical term that psychologists use called profoundly gifted, and it sounds sort of like abstract and fluffy and vague, but it's like a specific group of people who are obviously very, very intelligent, like off the chart IQ scale, and they tend to exhibit similar traits, and one of them is it's like this feeling that something is wrong in the world that needs to be fixed, and it's like a compulsion to want to fix it. And I think I'm totally convinced Elon fits into this category of people, and I also am convinced that he read probably, he may have read every science fiction book known to man before he was about 14.
Sure.
At least he was probably getting close.
I see.
And I think...
A few encyclopedias too, it
right.
sounds like.
Right. He read out like every bookstore in his neighborhood and every library.
Wow.
And then his parents were just getting encyclopedias, and he would pour through those. And I think he took that stuff. I think he took the sci-fi stuff really. I think it resonated with him. And once he made enough money to sort of go pursue something like building a rocket ship, that was right up his alley.
I see. Very cool. So one thing that I also enjoyed about the book is the first chapter or two. You give this nice background on his heritage, his family, and it's nice because it's not this arduous like every relative in the family tree, but there are people there flying in very primitive planes around the world, doing things that I knew a few people did back then, but I didn't realize that Elon's family. So he's definitely got some interesting folks. Would you mind, I guess, talking a little bit about how his childhood may have shaped the person he is today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, so just real quick, his grandfather on his mother's side, Joshua Haldeman, he probably deserves a book in and of his own right because he was insane.
Absolutely.
He was Canadian, and he just like picked up his family and moved to South Africa one day, and he used to fly his own single-engine plane. And with his wife, they flew, this would have been, I don't know, this would have been in the 50s, I want to say. They flew from South Africa all the way up the African coast, all the way across Asia down to Australia. It took them, it took them a year just to get the paperwork done to do this flight.
Wow.
and then one day they decided to enter this car race from South Africa to Northern Africa in a station wagon, and they got second place, I think, in this car race. And then, like every weekend or every other weekend, his grandfather would take Elon's mom and her 4 siblings, and they would go look for like the lost city of the Kalahari out in the bush, and they would land their planes, and there would be like lions in the camp and everything. So he was a chiropractor. It was like
There's a nice picture, I think, in the book as well that shows them with the plane.
with them with the plane. Yeah. Elon tried to buy the plane later in life. I mean, so I think sort of there's definitely like a little bit of that spirit. And Elon knew his grandfather. And then, they would always talk about these stories, and I think sort of this idea that if you want to do something, just go do it, no matter how sort of audacious it seems. Huh. But, I mean, on the other side, Elon was, he was a big reader and everything. He was also kind of a know-it-all. He didn't have a lot of friends growing up. It's sort of his family seemed like the only ones that really would tolerate him. And at school, I mean, he was basically either kind of ignored by a lot of people or bullied, and really badly. There's one incident that he talks about where he got kicked down a flight of stairs, and then the guys got lit into him even more after that, and he was in the hospital for about a week or two. And there were a few times like that. It was like South Africa at that time, even still today, it's very masculine, macho, sort of athletic culture, and Elon didn't play any sports, and he was like the bookish guy off in the corner. And then it was really funny. I mean, I went back and I found all these kids that he went to grade school with, and I was really surprised. I mean, they said, like 2 or 3 of them said he was like the least likely guy that we thought would do anything exceptional. It wasn't that they thought he was like bad at anything or anything. It was just that he was nobody thought about him. He just stayed to himself, and then he had a really horrendous relationship with his father, which, like in the book, he talks about sort of having this horrible childhood. It's kind of unfulfilling. He never tells us like exactly what his dad did to him. And in my interviews with him, there were times when he'd like start to well up with tears, and he would start to talk about it, and then he would shut off, and that happened like 4 or 5 times. But I think like the sum total of all this stuff was, I mean, you don't have to, you can just play armchair psychologist, and it's like a guy who's out to kind of prove to the world that, he's special and can get a lot of things done and deserves our attention.
I see. I appreciate that. I had one quote I wrote down. He says, I did not have a good childhood. It was like misery. And going off what you just said, would you say that chip on his shoulder, do you think it formed during that time? Does he still have it? Yeah,
I mean, I definitely think so. I mean, there were sort of 2 things going on with him. He was always this independent spirit. The second he's 17, he used to always want to get to America and to Silicon Valley in particular. He'd read about this is like where technology is happening. He got a computer at a young age and was really into it. And the second he's 17, he like runs away from home with $100 in his pocket and lands in Canada, and he's like backpacking around for a year. And so, he had sort of an independent streak. But I do think, I mean, anytime you tell him no, he's going to try to prove you wrong, that he can do something. And I think it's so funny because that quote you read, not only does, anytime I asked him sort of how he got through really tough times with the companies or in his life, I mean, he always talks about his childhood. His wives always talk about his childhood being horrible, all his close friends. I mean, so this is clearly something that like left this scar and this sort of need to get past it.
I see.
Yeah, and I do think he has a chip on his shoulder. We talked a little bit sort of like Michael Jordan kind of type figure. I mean, I do think Elon's cut in that mold. He's in that mold. He's just relentless and takes everything as a slight.
I see. Thank you. To move on to maybe a little happier things. What I was struck by is just as a lay person prior to reading the book, Elon is the guy, the Tesla guy, Solar City, SpaceX, and you just think, how does one man lead all these companies? And that's cool enough. But then I'm reading about him picking up a 350-pound sumo wrestler off the ground. I'm reading about him at his birthday parties, volunteering to have balloons placed all over his body, especially in between his legs, and having knife throwers throwing knives at him.
Yeah, the shareholder, these investors were not happy.
Not happy about that, right? And the one that I loved most is this anecdote that somebody says no to him at his company, like, I can't do this, and you're fired on the spot. I don't know if he fires somebody, he says, I'm going to be CEO of my 2 companies, and I'm going to be CEO of your job, and I'm going to accomplish this. And he has a streak of doing it, and it always works out. Is this the profoundly gifted? Is he just like a superhuman, I guess is what I'm getting at. Is he really Tony Stark?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because it sounds like such a sort of fanboy kind of thing. I mean, and like I tried to have the book be really balanced. I mean, but it definitely seems like, I mean, he has, he's got like a stamina and sort of a resolve that other people, just in my experience, do not seem to have, and it's kind of like an intensity of will. The stuff about, he really, and I thought this was total BS, because I'd heard these stories about you go to him and you say this thing's impossible, and then he does it, and I mean, it just sounds like total BS, but I mean, especially at SpaceX, I interviewed hundreds of people that worked at SpaceX, and I mean, many people said they saw this exact thing happen. It was like, you sort of tell him this thing can't be done, and he takes over the project. And he does it, and then, if he does it, you're pretty much kind of fired at the end of that, because you said it couldn't be done. And I think it takes a toll on him. When we would be at dinner, he would sometimes come in and just have this like really haggard sort of look, sort of like somebody at the end of a marathon, and he's just sitting there at 8 o'clock at night and has been in the office all day.
Right.
But he seems to be able to kind of do that for days on end. It's really strange.
Actually brings up an interesting thing. I decided not to read a passage from the book. It's a couple pages long, where you talk about a typical week for Elon.
Yeah.
There's also a nice, somebody put together an image of all the flights that he takes in a year, he took in 1 year. So how does a man run multiple companies like this? He has 5 kids.
5 boys, twins and triplets.
Right. How is it possible? We struggle with the 24 hours we're given in a day.
Yeah, I mean, I think he there's all the stuff we talked about, and then he has a lot of help as well. But I mean, it's a totally abnormal existence. So I mean, more or less, it fluctuates a little bit, but it's kind of Monday, Tuesday at SpaceX, coming in up here sort of Tuesday night, and then kind of Wednesday, Thursday at Tesla, and then Friday back to LA, and then typically it seemed like the weekends would be whichever company was having the most immediate disaster, and I mean, the entire time I was doing the book, he worked like 7 days a week, and
wow.
And then there's a woman in the book, Mary Beth Brown, who was, if Elon is kind of like Tony Stark, I mean, she would be his Pepper Potts. She was with him from PayPal on. She devoted her life to him. I mean, she lived in 2 cities, just like he did. Had no like boyfriend that I could discern, or she couldn't ever even have like lunch or anything like that. And she handled his personal affairs, like scheduling custody with the kids, who was going to pick them up, like basic things like that. And then business affairs, she handled Elon's like PR more or less for the really top level stuff. And so she was kind of this like glue that made everything work.
I see.
And then he used to have like a team of nannies. They've done a little like a nanny reduction lately, so they're down to 2 or 3. And then when he's up here, he's got his staying at the friends and all that.
Sure.
But it's a totally crazy existence. His kids, by all accounts, he's a very good dad. It's just that his kids live a very strange life. There was one time we were having dinner, and he said, I just got back from Monaco with the boys. We were watching the F1 races with the prince and princess, and then his people would tell me, like, because he brings the kids to SpaceX on the weekends, and it's like they're so bored of going to the rocket factory, and they're like the only 10-year-old boys on the planet that are like bored of going to the rocket factory.
That's great. That's fantastic. Kind of on this thread, I remember one of his employees, I think it's a director of one of the companies, somebody pretty high up, said, I would be in Europe or China and send him an email at 2:30 in the morning his time. 5 minutes later, I'd get an answer back. It's unbelievable to have support on that level. So what toll does it take on his health and his family if he's up up that late working 7 days a week?
Well, you can see, he's been married and divorced, and then his second wife, he's married, divorced, and then gotten back together with again. So
I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it takes I don't think he has anything resembling a normal life. There's another quote in the book where he's between wives at the moment, and he says, I was interviewing him at his cubicle in SpaceX, and he's like, I need a date again. He goes, how long do you think a woman needs a week? 10 hours? Is like 10 about right?
That's the minimum, I think, right?
And then there's another, you remind me of another thing, the guy who was talking about when he would answer emails at any time. I mean, there's one time when Elon's like in bed with Tallulah, his second wife, and the team has at SpaceX has totally screwed something up, and it's like 2 in the morning, and he doesn't want to wake Tallulah up, so and like Elon really lays into people, so he's like whisper yelling at these guys from bed, and
right.
They're all huddled around the speakerphone, taking this verbal lashing from him.
It's fantastic. Did you get that story from Tallulah or
that one
from one of the people on the
phone? That
phone,
was from this guy Kevin Brogan, who. Yeah, I mean, he was like on. So there's also this. There's like, I don't know if this is common to every tech company, but at Elon's companies, they always talk about the critical path, and so it was like the one thing that's kind of blocking the companies at any point in time, and so that's kind of where Elon puts his focus. And so I remember Kevin was on. He was like the guy on the critical path at that moment, and so that meant that Elon's like watching you 24 hours a day.
I see.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue into just what is he like with employees? It seemed like there was a general sense of admiration, but kind of very varied stories on either side of that line.
Yeah, I mean, I think Google has some of this going for it as well, and is probably among the few companies that do. But I think there's like this mission that Tesla and SpaceX have that the employees fully buy into, and it's sort of like a little bit different than working at another company. I mean, if you want to go to Mars and that's sort of like been your dreams as you were a kid, I mean, SpaceX is the place you go to work. If you are in electric cars or you really care about changing the global warming sort of situation, I mean,
sure.
You buy into that. And so there is kind of this sense of mission. There's there's this, there's like this faith in Elon, especially now. I think pre-2012, he was kind of struggling in a lot of ways. He's sort of hit his stride more, and so now I think there's this real faith that if you may have to work hard, you may suffer a bit, but there's nobody else who's going to sort of get it done the way he is, and that these companies are the place to do the most exciting work in those fields. It's kind of weird. The one thing that I was struck by the most is that at both Tesla and SpaceX, there's among like the EVPs, there's a group of people that had been there, really since both companies had been founded. I mean, so they've worked alongside Elon through thick and thin for 10 or 12 years, and pretty much on like a daily basis. And I don't think he would consider them friends, and I don't think they would consider him friends. I mean, I think it's still sort of there's always this line drawn for him, and And I don't know, I found that like a little bit weird just because they have been through, both companies have almost gone bust so many times and sort of pulled off pretty incredible feats. So it feels like this amazing bonding kind of exercise, But
wow.
So yeah, he's always the boss. Yeah.
I understand that. Okay, cool. I want to turn it over to the audience in a moment here. A couple of quick last ones. Can you tell us about the time that Google almost acquired Tesla?
Yeah. The Model S had come out in 2012, and it had received way better reviews than I think anyone, even Elon, would have expected. I mean, even the Detroit Automotive Press was saying this may be the best car ever built. Wow. And you had this whole first adopter wave of a lot of people in California who bought the car, which is, I mean, we're used to early adopters, but an early adopter for something that costs like $100,000, and its door handles may or may not work is like is a leap of faith, and people bought in. I mean, their sales were fantastic, and then things started to sort of cool off after you had that first wave. There were, like on the Tesla forums, there were glitches with the car, like windshield wipers would go kind of weird, the door handles would go weird, the interior was not really sort of where like a luxury car should be. And so I think a lot of people, you had to place orders to get in line for the car, and so people would put down $5,000 to get in line, but they were all waiting to actually convert that to a purchase till everything got worked out. And this was a huge problem for Tesla. I mean, because you're running a factory, it's burning through tons of money if it's not being filled, and so it was basically, I think it was like the second quarter of 2013. Elon could plot out that they're just going to run out of money.
Yeah.
And he was good friends with Larry, and I think he felt like Larry would sort of, because like the mission of the company is important to Elon. I think he felt like Larry, not only would be sort of like into buying the company, but it would see it through more than maybe some other guys. And so he turned to him for kind of this emergency bailout. And but Elon still didn't trust him enough. He wanted to remain CEO for, I think it was 5 years of time, like within the like auspices of Google, and he wanted an immediate guarantee for like I can't, it's in the book, but it was like $3 billion, I think, of money to sort of not only like see this tough time through, but advance the factory and everything. And then this very Elon thing happened. He basically took everybody in the company, whether you were like in HR or marketing or whatever you did, an engineer, and he had everybody call every single customer who had placed a reservation and try to talk them into converting it into a sale. And within 2 weeks, they sold so many cars that it ended up being Tesla's first profitable quarter. And then the stock price, immediately once they announced that, it shot up, and then it became the best performing stock of 2013. And so, there was never, like, not only did they have enough money to sort of see through the quarter, then Tesla became so expensive that it was like, I don't even think Google would have bought it anyway.
Understandably so.
Yeah.
Tesla, almost an alphabet company.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little tricky because some of the stuff is like sourced in the book, so there's only so much I can say. But this was like very close to happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Very interesting. At this time, I'd love to have folks in the audience also chime in with questions as well. I think Jeremy has a mic in the back.
Yeah, I want to go back to you were mentioning how much of an influence like comic books and like reading science fiction was for Musk. One of the things I was really curious about is looking at the industries that he's taken on. It's this very sort of kind of like modernist perspective of transportation, energy. Even the way he's thinking about AI. I'm curious if it's kind of reflecting this 50s, 60s view from like science fiction. And meanwhile, you think about like Philip K. Dick, you think about cyberpunk, a lot more sort of engaging with identity, how human identity evolves, how our composition evolves through genetic engineering. Do you see him engaging in some of these more sort of like recent preoccupations of science fiction?
I mean, like, first of all, I think your point is exactly right. I mean, and that's the way I sort of came, your first point, is the way I came to view the companies. Like the aerospace stuff in particular is sort of depressing outside of SpaceX. I would go to launches of like Arianespace and I mean these companies do amazing things, but the equipment looks like it's from like 1960 still, and you sort of expect there to be these kind of modern, you just expect it to have been advanced, and it just hasn't been. And SpaceX, definitely has put pressure on everybody to up their game on like software, all the electronics inside of the rockets, and then more recently, just with the way like a capsule should look. And Elon's going to come out with new spacesuits soon that he says are crazy, and so he's into all that stuff. And then I think the modernization of Tesla is pretty obvious, like beyond the electric car stuff, the software in the car. It's funny because people sort of ask the second part of the question to me. Some other times it's like, what, when's Elon going to cure cancer or something like that? Like, I don't think he, I've just never heard him really get into the biotech sort of, I've never heard him even address that stuff kind of outside of industry. It's really funny. I mean, I think that's kind of where he's locked in. And Craig Venter and Elon are pretty close, and they talk about sort of these like biological 3D printers on Mars and kind of where they want to go with that. But that was the only time I've ever heard him sort of even begin to sort of veer in that direction. One of the central arguments I try to make in the book is that Elon's, I give you guys credit too, but like Elon is one of our best examples, I think the best, of combining atoms and bits, and that, you know, this is obviously going to be this huge trend that we see in the next couple decades of essentially what he's done is take Silicon Valley, sort of that's just the way you run your business, more like the way companies are run here, and then the software ethos, and sort of push that into these industries that we're kind of not prepared yet to sort of move at that speed or think that way. There's examples in the book where, you know, if you want to put a radio on a rocket, NASA would make you put this $100,000 like space grade radio on the rocket, and I'm sure that was because they used to worry about the radiation and all these things sort of messing with the electronics. And then, you know, SpaceX was building their own for $5,000, and they would have to fly it up like a bunch of times and prove to them that it still worked, or that they could put 4 of the $5,000 radios on. And so, you know, to me, Elon invents a lot of stuff, but he's this great integrator of technologies and pushing these industries forward.
Thanks for talking to us. The book is great.
Oh, thank you.
You know, now that the book has been published, what is Elon's kind of response since you didn't get a chance to read it before?
Yeah.
And are you guys still in communication?
Yeah, it's complicated. Well, so I didn't want him to have to, like, even though he didn't get to make any change, I didn't want him to have to like buy it on Amazon and speed read through it before anything happened. So I think it was about 3 weeks before the book came out. Like the presses had started and all that stuff. So I sent him a copy, and then he did this very Elon thing. I woke up one morning and the first email, the timestamp was like 3:30 a.m. And you know, he had been going through the book like paragraph by paragraph, and it was sort of like, I mean, it was a mix of stuff, kind of silly things like I don't really eat like that, and then other things like, yeah, you got this right, and it was all over the place. It was actually kind of cool. You know, he sort of he was like, there's 3 factually wrong things, and 2 of them were like opinions of him, which I was trying to explain were not facts. And then the third one, he said, you know, that Kimball, his brother, had bought this car. They had a cross-country road trip, and he's like, I bought the car, not Kimball. I was like, okay, well, I'm sure we can get to the bottom of that before the paperback comes out. And then like there were a couple nastier emails, and then like a day went by, and then he came back and he said, you know, this is really well done, and he said he gave me a accuracy rating of 95%, which like in Elon terms is, you know, I take that as like 100% for mortals, and then, you know, basically those 3 weeks passed and the book came out. And then some of the press started grabbing, like the Washington Post did this list of the juiciest quotes or whatever from the book. And, you know, there were a couple there, like one, he said he was a samurai and he would not fail. And then the other one was about during sort of Tesla's rougher times, him giving this employee a hard time for going to see the birth of his child when he was supposed to be at a big meeting. And then it was weird when people reacted to that in a negative way. Then he reacted in a pretty negative way, and it was weird because he'd never even commented on either of those things when he read the book. And so then he kind of vented for a little bit, and then things have been pretty normal since then. I sort of covered some Tesla stuff. He's back together with Tallulah, and she's been quite nice to me. So I don't know. Things are still like a little tense, but not horrible.
To what extent do you think that a lot of what Musk is doing is a reaction to failure of our institutions? Like, the Hyperloop was essentially his version of a back-of-the-envelope drawing. I mean, it's a gigantic white paper, but it's a back-of-the-envelope drawing. And you see a lot of people like comparing that, and I think his idea was to compare it against California High-Speed Rail, which is this gigantic thing which seems to be emblematic of our inability as a civilization to really accomplish big things, and his shtick is trying to accomplish big things. To what extent do you think that he's responding to that, or that's why he seems to be so important, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, I broke the story on the Hyperloop, and I sat with Elon the first time he ever talked about it, and it was like exactly what you said. I mean, it was basically a brainstorm. You know, he saw the California high-speed rail coming and thought it was so disastrous and such a horrible mistake that he sort of had to come up with some other proposal. I know for a fact, you know, he had no intention of building the Hyperloop initially at all, and sort of, it was more of like a thought exercise, and just to sort of make people see how bad the train was and that we should be striving for something else. I think, you know, Elon, Larry, Jeff Bezos, they're all sort of examples of people who have amassed enough wealth now to do things that governments used to kind of do, and that are proving that they can accomplish stuff on that scale. And there doesn't seem to be a willingness on the government side to tackle a lot of these things. And so I guess it depends where you are on the spectrum. If you think this is a bunch of sort of Star Trek fans who have made too much money and are charging around, you know, going after these wild dreams, or if you buy into the idea that this is the direction we should head in. I mean, I think, if nothing else, you know, Elon set a good example for kind of believing in the spirit. Even if you just take SpaceX, you drop the Mars thing and all that. The U.S. used to have like 100% of the launch market. Then we went down to 0%, and we're, you know, completely uncompetitive on the worldwide stage. And now SpaceX is easily the low-cost leader, and it has brought us back. It's manufacturing everything in the United States. The other are like Lockheed and Boeing buy Russian engines to send up our spy satellites, which obviously the government sort of gave up if we're doing that. Yeah, no, I mean, I just completely agree. I think it's interesting. It's like a really interesting time to be alive when people can go do these sort of government scale type things.
Thanks. Love the books, and actually, I mean, I felt like I've been following Elon and Tesla and SpaceX pretty well for the last several years, and I was amazed how much I learned and how much I enjoyed hearing the sort of oral integrated, you know, way you talked about how the stories went. And all that. That's unusual for books about Silicon Valley, because normally you kind of feel like I'm just reading what I've read before. This is for the people who live outside there, but this really, I think this really broke through.
Thank you.
My question was, and it's more of just kind of your own gut opinion. A lot of the stuff that Elon says and does, it's hard for me to tell if he's being really savvy and cynical, like some of the PR stuff and some of the, or if it's just kind of vanity and he's off the cuff and whatever. You know, a lot of the PR feels very spontaneous, but you're not clear if he's just trying to sound that way, or like, I remember when we first saw the Tesla factory, there was this giant Schuler press, and there was this crazy story to get it in the factory, and then he made them take it all down and paint it red because he didn't like the way it looked. It's, you know, it's like, is it crazy, or is it brilliant, or is it both? I'm just kind of curious, you know, how you break down those kind of decisions he makes.
It's funny that you asked that. There were times when I would ask myself the exact same question. I mean, you know, it's definitely, I think it's a mix of both. There are these almost like propaganda sort of things that he does internally, but they actually do seem to work really well. Like when you go into the Tesla factory, I mean, it's hard not to be kind of like enthusiastic, and this is not some dingy car factory. This is like an exciting place making exciting cars with all this, you know, huge, massive logos and the color. And, you know, at SpaceX, I mean, everything is this pristine white. You could like eat off the floor, and you know, it's like the white counter, the white orchids, the white everything, all the way through. And so he has this sort of, that, to me, was the most sort of Steve Jobsian kind of part about him, is like he pays attention to things like that. The other, and then, you know, he's also very good at, he's definitely outclassing, in PR terms, his peers at like the aerospace companies and the automotive companies. I mean, I feel sort of bad for them sometimes. It's like Elon will do like a Reddit AMA, and then the like Lockheed CEO's like, oh, I'm going to do a Reddit AMA, and then every question is about Elon, you know, and then I remember Tesla was having an event the same day Ford was having an event, and there were like 50 people at the Ford thing, and there were 5,000 people lined up outside of the Tesla thing, all just because Elon tweeted about, you know, I may show something, and it's like, you know, with Elon, you never know, is it like actually going to be a thing, or is it just going to be sort of, you know, some software update that we're getting in 6 months, or you don't know. Other stuff, he's just totally off the cuff, and I think not very good at what he's doing. You know, like they had to sue the Air Force to try and get the rights to bid on the launch contracts for like spy satellites, and it was a Friday afternoon when they announced that. Like, so any other company, if you're going to sue potentially your largest customer and it's the government, you would like do this strategically, and what you would do is call up a reporter at the New York Times ahead of time and be like, look, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to leak you this story, and you would sort of feed them your spin and hope that the reporter does like a sympathetic sort of SpaceX story, and you would have that on the front page, you know, on like Monday morning. I'm pretty sure what happened was that Elon wrote the press release himself and like finished it at like 3:45 on a Friday, and then 5 minutes later like issued the press release, and then all his PR people were like, oh crap, we're suing the US government, now let's sort of figure out what we're going to say about this, and that's, you know, I think probably how that kind of thing goes. And he talks about it in the book a little bit, like the speeches and stuff like that. He definitely does not do the Steve Jobs, I'm rehearsing for days beforehand. I mean, he just gets up there and like wings it. And so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. He does, you know, you definitely have to give him credit for being like the five-tool player. I mean, to be able to do like some of the engineering, marketing, business decisions, like the fact that he actually has a hand in all that stuff and can do it competently, if not sort of excel at it at times, is like completely unusual.
Hi, what was the thing that surprised you about him the most?
I think just the, you know, once he agreed to cooperate with the book, and then it's probably about like 18 months. I mean, we had this weird relationship. We were not friends. It was like a business relationship of some sort, where I was obviously on the begging end, and so, you know, he could be, you know, he can be this wonderful guy to deal with, and then he can be a very hard guy to deal with, and like the ups and downs and the like intensity of that, and sort of being, because I definitely am in a weird space. I've spent way more time with him than all but probably like a pretty select group of people, especially for a journalist, way more time. And so like you would start to hear these stories, and then to get like the up close and personal, to see the intensity of how he operates firsthand, I was like, oh, okay, all this stuff makes a lot of sense now. Like I've just never met anyone who is just like all in about every single thing he does, and it just felt, you know, when everything was finally all said and done and the book came out, it was like, it just felt such a like relief, because it had just been this crazy process, yeah, and so I think, I mean, like in retrospect, I like feel blessed to have sort of gotten to know kind of what it's like, yeah. But yeah, that was, and then, I don't know, and then you hear all these stories along the way, you're like, there's no way this could be true. And then it turns out, like, I mean, most of them seem like they are kind of true, yeah. Just sort of the larger than life kind of thing, yeah.
I've actually got one more question. We'll do some, we'll stop after that, and then I think you'll stick around for a bit for some more. So forgive me, it's kind of a rambling question, but I've been thinking about this since we spoke maybe a couple hours ago, and we compared Elon in some ways to Michael Jordan. And just a quick side thing for anybody who's listening now or watching later, highly recommend going on YouTube and looking up the Hall of Fame enshrinement speech that Michael Jordan gave a few years ago. I forget, it was about a 20-minute long speech. You know, he gets up there and he gets the longest speech at the end, and he's going after guys like John Stockton, who he defeated for years. And John Stockton goes up there, is humble, grateful, he's there with his family, he's at peace. Jordan is still taking shots. He flies in the guy who was picked over him for the high school team just to like point him out in the audience. I think he flew the coach out too. So we're making some comparisons about this chip on the shoulder that Elon may or may still have. It's kind of a two-part question. You've met with a lot of these other CEOs. You met with Larry for this book. Part one is sort of, how does Elon compare to these other titans in a way? And then part two, I'd love to also ask you is, around the time that speech Jordan gave, ESPN, I think, did a cover story about how Jordan can't sleep at night. He has cowboy westerns on his TV that remind him of his father, and he needs them on all night to be able to sleep. Do you worry, or do you think even his friends might worry that Elon someday might be past his prime and still not letting go, I guess?
I never thought about that one.
It's tough for such a... I never would have thought about it either until we spoke. You know?
Yeah. So remind me exactly what the first...
Okay, first question is,
Yeah.
how does he compare to his contemporaries, his
Right.
peers? They all are leaders just filled with that drive.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Elon's unique in a couple ways. I mean, one, he is, to his credit, I mean, despite all this stuff I've said, I mean, he's like surprisingly down to earth in many, many ways. I talk about it in the book when he comes into the restaurant. I mean, he's not like, I'm Elon coming into the restaurant. It's just kind of like, I'm walking to my table. He doesn't really expect anyone to kind of notice him, or he just doesn't care. And he never had like lots of handlers. It was always just Elon. It was like, just deal with me. Let's just do this. And he was very earnest and like authentic when he was answering questions, or at least putting like a good effort forward. And then, like, I guess sort of the 180 part of that, though, is like, it's that intensity thing we were talking about before. I mean, he is on I think I've met most of the major tech CEOs, and he's just like, he's just on a level of intensity beyond them. I would say, sort of like the Michael Jordan thing. We talked about it before. I mean, definitely does not take no for an answer on a level that's like kind of frightening, and then is just relentless. There's a guy in the book who says something about like Elon will outthink you, out-hustle you, and there's one other part, but it's always like the hustle part that he will do anything to win, and when we were talking about Lockheed and the other CEOs, that's the other part where I feel sorry for them. I mean, you're just like a guy who's in a job and you're trying to run this company well, and there's this like maniac who's just like, I'm gonna destroy you, And for him, it's war, right? And for these other guys, you're a CEO running a major company. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable.
I see.
and so yeah, I think for him, it's like everything is kind of a bit of a battle.
I see.
Yeah.
And the last part that was
Yeah.
just, do you ever think it might have a toll someday?
I think sort of what I talked about too, when you could see it on his face, it clearly already has like a physical toll. And then I think there's a weird thing that I noticed, which is that as time has gone on and he's done better and better and made more money, the funny thing, like SpaceX, Jeff Bezos had the luxury of being filthy, filthy rich by the time he started Blue Origin. He never had to turn like his space company into a for-profit enterprise. If he wants to go to Mars, he can just go to Mars. Elon had made a lot of money, like $200 million from PayPal, but not enough to like make a colony on Mars. So he had to like make a for-profit space company.
He had to hustle.
Yeah, he had to hustle, and he had to, and so I think. As this stuff has started to like pan out for him and he's made more money, it's not like it's a relief for him. It's like, now I'm going to announce the Hyperloop. Now I'm going to announce like the space internet. It's like it's always growing and growing and growing. I think there's almost like an addiction to doing, and I think he does enjoy sort of the Tony Stark sort of thing. I think he enjoys like the adoration of people, and so. Instead of it being kind of a moment to pause and just be the status quo for a little bit and use the money to just advance the businesses, it's like, no, now we're going to do the next crazy thing. And you see it with Tesla too. I mean, he sort of has to build the Gigafactory to get the batteries down where he wants to get the price of the car down. But it's like Tesla had just hit this point. You've made the best car the automotive industry's ever seen. The stock price is doing well. You're like turning a profit sometimes, and it's like, okay, now we're just going to take all the money and then we're going to raise $2 billion more and bet the company on this battery factory. Like the minute that happened. Yeah. And so he's just relentless.
Very cool. It's a fascinating read. That was a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.